The Archives of Memory. Chapter 1. The Diagnosis. Dr. Eleanor Whitman noticed the word slipping away like a fish darting beneath the surface of her mind. It was there, then gone. She stood before her colleagues at Johns Hopkins, laser pointer in hand, her PowerPoint slide displaying a cross-section of hippocampal tissue. And here we can see clear evidence of neuronal... The word vanished. Neuronal what? Her mouth remained open, the silence stretching as 40 pairs of eyes fixed on her. 3 seconds passed. 4, 5. Deterioration, she finally said, the word arriving like a late train. Neuronal deterioration consistent with early-stage Alzheimer's. She continued smoothly, moving to the next slide, but her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't the first time. The incidents were becoming more frequent. A forgotten appointment last month, misplacing her car keys in the refrigerator. Now this lexical lapse during her keynote address at the International Conference on Memory Disorders. The irony wasn't lost on her. 35 years studying the mechanics of memory loss, and now memory was slipping through her own fingers. After her presentation, Dr. James Chen, her former graduate student and now director of neuroscience at Boston Memorial, approached. "Brilliant as always, Eleanor," he said, his smile genuine, but his eyes searching her face. "Your work on protein markers is groundbreaking." "Thank you, James." She gathered her papers, keeping her hand busy to hide their slight tremor. "We've missed you on the ethics committee. How's the new research coming along?" "Final stages," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm close to something significant with the memantine derivative." He nodded, then lowered his voice. "Are you all right? You seemed to hesitate during—" "Conference fatigue," she interrupted, forcing a smile. "Nothing more." But as she watched him walk away, Eleanor knew she couldn't dismiss the symptoms much longer. She, of all people, recognized the signs. Back in her hotel room, she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her phone. She'd been avoiding this call for weeks. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Abigail's voice carried the wariness of someone accustomed to bad news. "Everything's fine," Eleanor said. "I was wondering if you might be free for dinner next weekend. I'll be back in Baltimore by then." The silence that followed spoke volumes. She and Abigail hadn't shared a meal in over 2 years. "Sure," Abigail finally said. "Is there something we need to discuss?" Eleanor closed her eyes. "I just think it's time we talked, in person." "Okay." Another pause. "Should I be worried?" "No," Eleanor lied. "No need to worry." After hanging up, she opened her laptop and created a new document. She titled it, "The Archives of Memory, a Neurologist's Case Study." Beneath, she typed a subtitle, Subject, Self. Then, with clinical detachment, she began to document her symptoms, from the earliest signs 6 months ago to today's episode. She included times, dates, circumstances, and her own hypotheses about the affected neural pathways. What she was experiencing wasn't typical age-related memory decline. She knew the difference. This was the beginning of the disease she'd spent her career fighting. The disease that had taken her mother and maternal grandmother. The disease she'd hoped to cure before it found her. 3 days later, Eleanor sat across from Dr. Vivian Rhodes, a colleague she respected but had never been particularly close to. She had chosen Vivian deliberately, someone competent enough to trust with her diagnosis, but not so intimate that it would become emotional. "I need a full neurological workup," Eleanor said. "Comprehensive cognitive assessment MRI with hippocampal volumetry, PET scan, CSF analysis. Vivian's eyebrows rose. That's extensive, Eleanor. Any specific concerns? I've been experiencing symptoms consistent with early-onset Alzheimer's. I need confirmation. The clinical phrasing didn't fool Vivian. Her face softened. How long? 6 months, possibly longer. Vivian nodded, her professional demeanor returning. I'll expedite everything. We'll do this discreetly. I'd appreciate that. As Vivian scheduled the tests, Eleanor added, I'd like all results sent directly to me first. I'll forward them to you after I've reviewed them. Eleanor, that's not protocol. Please, Eleanor said, her voice steady. I need to process this my way. Vivian hesitated, then nodded. On one condition. You don't interpret the results alone. We review them together. Eleanor agreed, knowing this small concession would be the first of many surrenders of autonomy that lay ahead. The following Saturday, Eleanor drove to the restaurant where she was meeting Abigail. She parked, but remained in her car, studying her reflection in the rearview mirror. At 62, she still had more black hair than gray, though that was changing. Lines framed her eyes and mouth, not so many that they told the story of a difficult life, but enough to suggest she'd lived fully. She looked competent, authoritative. Would that change as the disease progressed? Would people still see her as doctor, Eleanor Whitman, pioneering neurologist, or merely as a patient? Inside, she spotted Abigail immediately. Her daughter had her height and her jawline, but had inherited her father's warm brown eyes and olive complexion. She was 34 now, no longer the angry 20-something who had stormed out of Eleanor's life after David's funeral. Mom. Abigail stood, but didn't offer a hug. You look well, Eleanor said, taking a seat. How's work? Busy. We're in post-production for the PBS series. The waiter arrived and they ordered drinks, white wine for Eleanor, sparkling water for Abigail. So, Abigail said after the waiter left, what's this about? Eleanor had planned to ease into the conversation, perhaps rebuild some rapport before delivering the news, but Abigail's direct approach made that impossible. I've been experiencing some health issues, she began. I'm still waiting on confirmatory tests, but I have reason to believe I'm in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Abigail's face remained impassive, but her hands tightened around her water glass. What symptoms? Memory lapses, word-finding difficulties, some spatial disorientation. Have you seen a doctor? I am a doctor, Eleanor said, more sharply than she intended. But yes, I'm going through the proper diagnostic protocols. Abigail nodded, looking down at the table. When she raised her eyes again, they shimmered with unshed tears. How long have you known? Suspected for a few months. Should have confirmation next week. And you're telling me now because... The question hung between them, heavy with their complicated history. Eleanor had always chosen work over family, even, especially, when David was dying. Abigail had never forgiven her for being at a conference when her father took his last breath. Because I want to document it, Eleanor said. The progression, from the inside. No one has done that before. Not a neurologist with my expertise. This could be valuable research. Abigail's expression hardened. You want to turn your own illness into a research project? I want it to mean something, Eleanor corrected. And I need help. I need someone to record what I can't remember to write down. someone to interview me as my awareness changes. And you thought of me because I make documentaries. I thought of you because you're my daughter." Abigail laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That's never been reason enough before." Eleanor felt a flash of anger, quickly followed by sadness. They had so little time to waste on old grievances. "I deserve that," she acknowledged. "But this isn't about our past, Abigail. This is about creating something meaningful from what's happening to me, something that might help others. And what if I don't want to watch my mother disappear? I already did that with Dad, remember?" Eleanor flinched. I remember. I remember everything for now. That's why this matters. I need to do this while I still can." Their food arrived, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. They ate in silence for several minutes before Abigail spoke again. "What would this involve exactly?" "Regular interviews, video recordings, cognitive assessments that we document together. I'm still running my lab. We're close to a breakthrough with a new drug therapy. I want to record that work too before—" She stopped, unable to complete the sentence. Abigail set down her fork. "Before you can't anymore?" Eleanor nodded. "What about your care? Have you thought about that? Where you'll live when it gets worse?" "One step at a time," Eleanor said. "Let's get the diagnosis first." As they finished their meal, Abigail didn't commit to anything, but she didn't refuse either. It was more than Eleanor had dared to hope for. A beginning, perhaps. The diagnosis came on Tuesday. Probable Alzheimer's disease, early stage. The MRI showed mild hippocampal atrophy. The PET scan revealed amyloid deposits, and her CSF analysis indicated elevated tau protein levels. Classic biomarkers. Eleanor sat in her office at the university, the results open on her computer screen. Through the window, she could see students crossing the quad, their lives stretching before them like an open book with blank pages waiting to be filled. Her own book, she realized, had a rapidly approaching final chapter. She hadn't expected to feel fear. Intellectual curiosity, yes. Clinical interest in her own case, certainly. But not this cold dread that had settled in her stomach since seeing the scan results. Her phone rang. It was Abigail. "I'll do it," her daughter said without preamble. "Your project, but I have conditions." Eleanor felt a surge of emotion, relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't immediately identify. "Name them." "I do this as a professional, not just as your daughter. Full creative control over the final documentary." "Agreed. You'll answer my questions honestly, all of them, about your health, your research, and our family." Eleanor hesitated. "I'll try." "Not good enough, Mom. I need complete honesty or this won't work." "All right," Eleanor conceded. "Complete honesty. And finally," Abigail continued, "you'll let me help with your care planning. No shutting me out of decisions." This was the hardest condition. Eleanor had been fiercely independent her entire life. The thought of relinquishing control, especially to her daughter, felt like admitting defeat before the battle had truly begun. "Mom, are you still there?" "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "I agree to your conditions." "Good. I'll be in Baltimore on Friday. We'll start then." After hanging up, Eleanor turned back to her computer and opened a file she'd started at the conference. The Archives of Memory. She began to type. Day 1, post-diagnosis. Cognitive function remains high. No noticeable decline in verbal fluency since last self-assessment. Short-term memory occasionally compromised, long-term memory intact. The research team continues work on the modified memantine compound, early results promising. We may be close to something that could slow progression significantly. Abigail has agreed to help document my case. Our first formal recording session is scheduled for Friday. Personal note: fear is an unexpected component of this experience. Not fear of death, but fear of the self dissolving before death arrives. Must monitor these psychological responses as part of the study. She saved the file and turned to the lab reports waiting on her desk. There was still work to do. Important work. And now, a race against time. Chapter 2. The recording begins. Abigail arrived with equipment, a professional-grade camera, lapel microphones, lighting. Eleanor watched her daughter transform her living room into a makeshift studio with efficient movements that spoke of years of experience. "Is all this necessary?" Eleanor asked, eyeing the soft-box light Abigail was positioning. "If we're doing this, we're doing it properly," Abigail replied without looking up from her work. "Proper lighting, good sound quality. This isn't just for your research notes, Mom. This is for posterity." The word hung in the air between them. Posterity. A future that would exist without Eleanor Whitman. A time when these recordings might be all that remained of her. "Ready?" Abigail asked, gesturing to the armchair positioned in front of the bookcases. Eleanor's academic awards and framed diplomas were visible in the background. A deliberate choice on Abigail's part, Eleanor suspected. She sat, smoothing her slacks. "Should I introduce myself?" Abigail nodded, pressing record. "State your name, the date, and why we're doing this." Eleanor faced the camera. "I am Dr. Eleanor Whitman, Professor of Neurology and Director of the Memory Disorders Research Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University. Today is April 15th, 2023. I have recently been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, and I am embarking on a project to document the progression of my condition from the unique perspective of a neurologist who has spent her career studying the very disease that is now affecting her." She paused, then added, "I am 62 years old. I have one daughter, Abigail, who is filming this record. My cognitive abilities remain largely intact at this time, though I have experienced increasing episodes of short-term memory loss and word-finding difficulties." Abigail moved from behind the camera to sit across from her mother. "Tell me about your current research." Eleanor straightened, on familiar ground now. "My team is in the final stages of testing a modified memantine compound that targets specific neural pathways affected in early Alzheimer's. Initial results indicate it may be more effective than current medications at slowing disease progression, possibly even halting it if administered early enough." "And could this help you?" "Potentially. We're still months away from human trials, but given my position and the circumstances—" She trailed off. "You'd accelerate your own treatment," Abigail finished for her. "If the preliminary data continues to be promising, yes." Abigail made a note on her tablet. "Let's talk about your symptoms. When did you first notice something was wrong?" Eleanor shifted in her seat. This was more difficult territory. "About 8 months ago. I was giving a lecture on hippocampal plasticity and lost my train of thought mid-sentence. It wasn't ordinary forgetfulness. It was as if the information had been erased." "Were you concerned immediately?" I dismissed it as fatigue, but then Similar incidents began occurring more frequently. I would find myself in a room, unsure why I'd entered. I misplaced items in illogical places. 3 months ago, I got lost driving home from the university, a route I've taken for 15 years. Abigail's professional demeanor slipped. You never told me that. There was no reason to worry you at that point. What about Dad's research? Have you revisited it? The question caught Eleanor off guard. David, her late husband, had been a biochemist whose work had tangential connections to her own field. No, she said carefully. His research on protein folding was promising, but ultimately inconclusive. But it could be relevant now, couldn't it? To your condition? Eleanor frowned. Perhaps. But the focus of his work was different. You promised complete honesty, Mom. I'm being honest. David's work was brilliant, but unfinished. When he died, you buried his research along with him, Abigail said, her voice tight. You never even read his final papers. Eleanor felt a flash of the old defensiveness. That's not fair. I was overwhelmed with my own work, with raising you alone, with avoiding your grief, Abigail cut in, with burying yourself in your lab instead of dealing with the fact that he was gone. The camera was still rolling, recording this unexpected detour into personal history. Is this necessary for your documentary? Eleanor asked coldly. It's necessary for understanding you, Abigail replied, and understanding your approach to your own illness. You compartmentalize, Mom. You always have. You're doing it now, turning yourself into a research subject instead of a patient, instead of a person facing a devastating diagnosis. Eleanor stood abruptly. I think we're done for today. Abigail remained seated. Running away from uncomfortable conversations. That's familiar, too. I'm not running away. I'm establishing boundaries for this project. Fine. Abigail switched off the camera. But we will have to discuss Dad eventually. His death, your response to it, how it affected our relationship. It's all relevant to what's happening now. Eleanor rubbed her temples. A headache was forming behind her eyes. Another day, perhaps. As Abigail packed up her equipment, the tension between them gradually eased. Same time tomorrow? Abigail asked. Eleanor nodded. I have lab meetings in the morning, but I should be home by 3. At the door, Abigail hesitated. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is brave, misguided in some ways, but brave. It was the closest thing to a compliment her daughter had offered in years. Eleanor managed a small smile. Thank you for agreeing to help. After Abigail left, Eleanor returned to her study and opened her laptop. She created a new entry in her digital journal, Day 4 Post-Diagnosis. First recording session with Abigail. Cognitive function normal during discussion of research, but emotional responses heightened during personal questions. Note to self. Monitor this intersection of cognitive and emotional processing as disease progresses. Abigail raised questions about David's research that I hadn't considered. Possible relevance to my own condition? Must review his final papers. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, with deliberate honesty, she added, Personal note, Abigail's assessment of my coping mechanisms is uncomfortably accurate. Am I approaching my diagnosis as a scientist rather than a patient to avoid confronting my fear? Question requires further reflection. The next day, Eleanor stood before her research team in the laboratory conference room. 8 brilliant minds, postdoctoral fellows, research assistants and graduate students, all looking to her for guidance. None of them knew about her diagnosis. "The latest results from the mouse trials are encouraging," she said, gesturing to the data projected on the screen. Hippocampal neurons showed 40% less deterioration in the treatment group compared to controls. Dr. Maya Patel, her senior postdoc, raised a hand. "The dosage is still concerningly high, Doctor. Whitman, we're seeing liver toxicity in nearly 30% of the subjects." "Then we modify the delivery method," Eleanor replied. "Try a targeted approach to reduce systemic exposure." The meeting continued, the team debating various approaches to improving the compound. Eleanor watched them with a mixture of pride and urgency. This room contained some of the finest young minds in neuroscience. Together, they might find the breakthrough that had eluded researchers for decades, a breakthrough that might come too late for her. "Dr. Whitman?" Maya's voice broke through her thoughts. "You seemed lost for a moment there." Eleanor refocused. "Just considering the implications of Ryan's suggestion. Let's implement the protocol changes immediately. I want new data by next week." As the team filed out, Maya lingered. "Is everything all right? You've seemed distracted lately." Eleanor regarded her protégé. Maya had been with her for 5 years, brilliant and perceptive. If anyone on the team would notice subtle changes in Eleanor's behavior, it would be Maya. "I've had a lot on my mind," Eleanor said carefully. "Some personal matters." Maya nodded, not pressing further. "If there's anything I can do to help with the research load—" "Thank you, but that won't be necessary." Eleanor gathered her papers. "Though I would like you to take the lead on the next phase of testing. Consider it professional development." Maya's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected opportunity. "Of course, I'd be honored." It was the first step in what Eleanor knew would be a gradual transition of leadership. Maya was more than capable, and when the time came, when Eleanor could no longer function effectively as director, the research would continue under Maya's guidance. Later that afternoon, as promised, Eleanor met Abigail for their second recording session. This time, her daughter had a different approach. "I'd like to do a cognitive assessment on camera," Abigail explained. "Standard tests that we can repeat periodically to track changes." Eleanor nodded. "A baseline measurement. Good thinking." Abigail had prepared thoroughly, bringing printed materials for the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, the Mini Mental State Examination, and several other standardized tests used to evaluate cognitive function in dementia patients. "Let's start with word recall," Abigail said once the camera was rolling. "I'm going to read a list of words, and I'd like you to repeat as many as you can remember afterward." Eleanor listened carefully as Abigail read 10 common nouns. When asked to recall them, she managed 8, a score within normal range, but lower than her usual perfect performance. "Now draw a clock showing 10 past 11, Abigail instructed. Eleanor complied, her rendering accurate. "Copy this figure exactly," Abigail said, showing her a complex geometric design. Again, Eleanor reproduced it without difficulty. They proceeded through the assessments, Eleanor performing well on most tasks, but showing subtle impairments in delayed recall and certain executive functions. The results confirmed what she already knew. She was in the early stages of cognitive decline, still functioning at a high level, but with detectable deficits. "How does it feel?" Abigail asked when they had finished. being on the other side of these tests? Eleanor considered the question. Humbling, she finally said. I've administered these hundreds of times, watching patients struggle, reassuring them when they made mistakes. I never truly understood the anxiety they felt until now. Are you afraid of what's coming? Eleanor met her daughter's gaze. Yes, she admitted. I'm afraid of losing myself, of becoming someone you don't recognize, someone I don't recognize. Abigail's professional facade softened. I've been reading about your research. The new compound seems promising. It is, but we're still years from FDA approval under normal circumstances. And you don't have years? No, Eleanor agreed. I don't? Abigail hesitated, then asked, Have you considered experimental treatment? Using your own research? It would be ethically complicated, but yes, I've considered it. And, Eleanor sighed, the university's ethics committee would never approve it. The compound isn't ready for human trials. Since when do you let institutional bureaucracy stand in your way? There was a hint of the old bitterness in Abigail's voice. You've always put your work above everything else, above everyone else. That's not fair, isn't it? You missed my college graduation because of a conference. You were in Stockholm accepting an award when Dad died. Eleanor felt a surge of anger. I've apologized for that, repeatedly. What do you want from me, Abigail? What would make it right after all these years? I want you to fight, Abigail said, her voice rising. Not just for your research, not just for some abstract contribution to science. I want you to fight for yourself, for more time, so that maybe— She stopped, her eyes filling with tears. Maybe what? Eleanor pressed. Maybe we could have the time we never had before. Maybe I could finally get to know my mother before she disappears. The raw emotion in her daughter's voice stunned Eleanor. All these years, she had interpreted Abigail's anger as rejection, as judgment for her choices. She had never considered that beneath the resentment might be longing. I don't know how to fight this, Eleanor admitted quietly. As a doctor, yes, as a researcher. But as a patient, I don't know how to be that person. Abigail wiped her eyes. Then maybe that's what we need to figure out together. Later that night, Eleanor found herself in her home office, opening a box she hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were David's research notebooks, his final papers, the work he had been doing before cancer took him too quickly for proper goodbyes. She lifted out the top notebook, running her fingers over her husband's neat handwriting. David had been studying protein misfolding in neurodegenerative diseases, work that had seemed adjacent to her own at the time, but not directly applicable. Now, with her diagnosis, she wondered if she had missed something important in her grief. As she began to read, memories of David flooded back, his enthusiasm when experiments yielded unexpected results, his patience when explaining complex biochemical processes to their young daughter, his unwavering support of Eleanor's career, even when it meant sacrifices for their family. Hours passed as she immersed herself in his research. Around midnight, she found it, a theoretical approach to targeting tau protein aggregation that she had never fully explored. David had proposed a mechanism that, combined with her team's current work, might provide a more effective intervention. Eleanor reached for her phone, then hesitated. It was too late to call Maya. This would keep until morning. Instead, she opened her journal and began to write. Day 5, post-diagnosis. Cognitive assessment with Abigail established baseline functioning. Mild impairment in delayed recall and executive function consistent with early Alzheimer's. Significant personal breakthrough in conversation with Abigail. Need to reconsider priorities and approach to my condition. Reviewing David's research has yielded a potential new direction for the Memantine Project. We'll discuss with team tomorrow. Personal note, is it possible that, in avoiding my grief all these years, I also avoided insights that might have advanced my work? The intersection of personal and professional has always been uncomfortable territory for me. Perhaps that needs to change. She closed the journal and looked at the photograph on her desk. David holding 4-year-old Abigail on his shoulders, both of them laughing. What would he think of her now? Of the way she had handled his death? Of her relationship with their daughter? Of her approach to her own illness? "I'm trying, David," she whispered to the silent room. "I'm finally trying." Chapter 3. Bridges and Barriers. The following weeks established a rhythm. Eleanor continued her work at the laboratory, incorporating David's insights into their research protocol. Abigail came 3 times a week for recording sessions, which evolved from formal interviews into more conversational exchanges, interspersed with regular cognitive assessments to track Eleanor's status. There were good days and bad. On good days, Eleanor functioned almost normally. Her vast knowledge and sharp intellect barely diminished. On bad days, words eluded her. Familiar faces became momentarily unrecognizable, and simple tasks required concentrated effort. "The fluctuations are typical of early-stage Alzheimer's," she explained to Abigail during one recording. "Neural compensation mechanisms allow the brain to work around damaged areas, but the effectiveness varies day to day depending on factors like stress, fatigue, and even atmospheric pressure changes." "Is that why you seem worse in the evenings?" Abigail asked, adjusting the camera angle. Eleanor nodded. "Sundowning. Cognitive function tends to decline as the day progresses. It's a well-documented phenomenon." "How does it feel when it happens?" Eleanor considered the question. "Like walking through fog. Everything is there, but obscured. I know what I want to say, but the words are slippery." She paused, then added, "The most disturbing aspect is the awareness. I know what's happening. I can feel my mind failing, but I can't stop it." Abigail made notes on her tablet. "You've been incorporating Dad's research into your work. Has that yielded any progress?" "Yes, actually. His approach to tau protein stabilization, combined with our memantine derivative, is showing remarkable results in the latest tests. Maya, my postdoc, is extremely excited." "Excited enough to fast-track human trials?" Eleanor sighed. "It's not that simple, Abigail. The ethics committee—" "Has anyone on the ethics committee ever faced a death sentence?" Abigail interrupted. "Because that's what this is, Mom. A death sentence with a particularly cruel method of execution." The bluntness of her daughter's assessment hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "I'm aware of what's coming," she said quietly. "Are you? Really?" Abigail leaned forward. "Because you still haven't told your colleagues about your diagnosis. You haven't made any long-term care arrangements. You're acting like this is a fascinating research problem rather than your life." "What would you have me do? Resign my position? Move into a memory care facility while I can still function? Abandon the work that might help thousands of future patients?" I'd have you acknowledge reality, Abigail replied. Start the difficult conversations. Prepare for what's coming. Eleanor felt a surge of the old defensiveness. I am preparing. These recordings, my daily journals, they're all part of preparing. They're documentation, not preparation. Abigail switched off the camera. This isn't just about your research legacy, Mom. It's about practical decisions that will need to be made when you can no longer make them. The truth of her daughter's words was undeniable, but Eleanor wasn't ready to face those conversations. Not yet. She still had time, months, perhaps a year or more of relatively high functioning. I'll speak with my attorney, she conceded. Update my advance directives, my power of attorney. Abigail nodded, but her expression remained troubled. There's something else we need to discuss. I've been offered a position documenting indigenous water rights in the Southwest. 3 months on location. When would you leave? Next month? But I'll turn it down if— No, Eleanor interrupted. You shouldn't put your career on hold. I'm still capable of caring for myself. This isn't about capability, Mom. It's about time. 3 months is significant given your condition. The unspoken reality hung between them. 3 months might represent a substantial percentage of Eleanor's remaining lucid time. Take the position, Eleanor insisted. We can continue the recordings when you return. My decline won't be so rapid that 3 months will make a critical difference. Abigail didn't seem convinced, but she didn't argue further. I'll talk to the producer about modifying the schedule. Maybe I can fly back for weekends. After Abigail left, Eleanor went to her study and opened her laptop. Her journal entries had become increasingly detailed, a mixture of clinical observations and personal reflections. Day 37 post-diagnosis. Modified cognitive assessment score decreased by 2 points from baseline, primarily in delayed recall tasks. Word-finding difficulties more pronounced in afternoon sessions. Lab results continued to show promise. David's approach to tau stabilization has improved efficacy by approximately 22% in our mouse models. Liver toxicity remains a concern, but is decreased with the new delivery method. Abigail will be leaving for a documentary project next month. She offered to decline, but I insisted she go. Am I being selfish in my independence, or am I sparing her from watching my decline? Perhaps both. Personal note: found myself unable to remember my mother's maiden name today. It returned to me an hour later, Sullivan, but the temporary absence was terrifying. These episodes of knowing that I should know something yet being unable to access the information are becoming more frequent. Eleanor closed the journal and leaned back in her chair. I'd like to review the complete data set. Late that night, Eleanor sat in her home office, reviewing Maya's data on her secure laptop. The results were even more promising than her postdoc had indicated. The combined approach, Eleanor's memantine derivative with David's tau stabilization method, showed potential to not just slow the progression of Alzheimer's, but possibly reverse some early damage. The compound was not without risks. Even with the targeted delivery system, there were concerns about long-term effects on liver function, potential disruption of other neural processes, and unknown interactions with the brain's compensation mechanisms. But what was the alternative? A steady, inexorable decline into confusion, dependency, and ultimately, the complete loss of self. Eleanor opened a new document and began to type, Protocol for Self-Administered Experimental Treatment, with compound EW714/DB291. She outlined dosage calculations based on body weight, a schedule for gradually increasing the concentration, and a comprehensive testing regime to monitor for adverse effects. She included provisions for discontinuing treatment if certain safety thresholds were crossed. By dawn, she had a complete protocol. All she needed was the compound itself, which was stored in the university laboratory under standard security measures. She saved the document, encrypted it, and closed her laptop. What she was contemplating wasn't just ethically questionable. It could end her career, even lead to criminal charges for misuse of research materials. But weighed against the certainty of what awaited her without intervention, the risks seemed acceptable. Eleanor rested her head in her hands, exhaustion washing over her. Would she actually do this? Cross the line from researcher to test subject without institutional approval? The Eleanor Whitman, who had built her career on scientific rigor and ethical practice, would never have considered it. But that Eleanor wasn't facing the erasure of her own mind. "You look terrible," Abigail said when she arrived for their scheduled recording session the next day. "Did you sleep at all?" Eleanor waved away her concern. "I was reviewing data. Lost track of time." "Another exciting breakthrough?" Abigail began setting up her camera. "Potentially." Eleanor hesitated, then asked, "Do you think it's ethical to pursue experimental treatment outside approved protocols if the alternative is certain deterioration?" Abigail's hand stilled on the camera. "Are you asking theoretically, or are you planning something?" "Theoretically for now." Abigail considered the question carefully. "I think terminal patients should have more autonomy in treatment decisions than the current system allows. But I also understand why protocols exist." "That's not really an answer." "No, it's not." Abigail finished setting up the equipment. "Let me ask you something instead. If a patient came to you, someone with your exact diagnosis, your exact circumstances, what would you advise them?" "I'd tell them to exhaust all approved treatments first." "Which you've done." "Yes." "And then?" Eleanor met her daughter's gaze. "Then I'd probably advise them to join a clinical trial." "But there are no trials currently except in patients for the treatment you're developing?" "No." Abigail switched on the camera. "For today's session, I'd like to discuss how your diagnosis has affected your perspective on medical ethics. Has being on the patient side changed how you view the rules you've enforced as a researcher?" It was a clever redirection, allowing Eleanor to explore her thoughts without explicitly discussing plans that might be legally problematic. For the next hour, they engaged in a philosophical conversation about autonomy, institutional oversight, and the tension between innovation and safety in medical research. "The system is designed to protect patients," Eleanor explained, "to prevent exploitation, to ensure that treatments are proven safe before widespread use. These are important safeguards." "But the system is slow," Abigail pointed out, "and for patients with progressive conditions, time is the one thing they don't have." "Exactly. The balance between caution and speed is never perfect. Too much caution, and patients die waiting for treatments. Too little, and patients die from treatments that should never have been approved." "Where do you fall on that spectrum now, as someone with a limited time horizon?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. I find myself more willing to accept risk than I was before. The calculus changes when you're measuring potential side effects against certain decline. After the recording session, as Abigail was packing up her equipment, she said casually, "Whatever you're considering, Mom, I hope you'll be careful." "Of course. And I hope you'll tell me before you do anything unorthodox." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Would you try to stop me?" "No," Abigail said, "but I'd want to document it properly. For the film." It was said lightly, but Eleanor heard the real message beneath. Abigail knew she was planning something, and while she wouldn't interfere, she wanted to be included, to be trusted with the truth. "I'll keep you informed," Eleanor promised. The next day at the lab, Eleanor found an opportunity when the research team went to lunch. She stayed behind, claiming she needed to finish reviewing a grant proposal. Once alone, she accessed the secure storage where experimental compounds were kept. The vial of EW714/DB291 was small, the liquid inside clear and unremarkable in appearance. Eleanor transferred a precisely calculated amount to a transport container designed for biological samples, then carefully returned the original vial to its place, adjusting the inventory log to account for the missing quantity as a routine quality control sample. She was completing the entry when Maya returned unexpectedly. "Dr. Whitman, I thought you'd gone to lunch?" Eleanor turned, keeping her expression neutral. "Just finishing some paperwork. Did you forget something?" Maya approached, glancing at the inventory log. "I wanted to check something in the latest test results." She hesitated, then asked, "Is everything all right? You've seemed preoccupied lately." For a brief moment, Eleanor considered confiding in her protégé. Maya was brilliant, compassionate, and discreet. She might even support Eleanor's decision to self-experiment. But involving her would put Maya's own career at risk if the unauthorized trial were discovered. "Everything's fine," Eleanor assured her. "Just a lot on my mind with the new research direction." Maya seemed unconvinced, but didn't press further. "The team is excited about the combined approach. We're already discussing how to structure the proposal for human trials." "Good. Keep me updated." Eleanor gathered her papers, careful to maintain a casual demeanor. "I think I'll take lunch in my office today. I have calls to make." That evening, alone in her home, Eleanor prepared for the first treatment. She had converted a spare bedroom into a makeshift clinical space, with equipment borrowed legitimately from the university for home research purposes: a blood pressure monitor, a portable EEG device, and a comprehensive blood testing kit. She had just finished setting up when her doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found James Chen, her former graduate student and current colleague, standing on her porch. "James, what brings you here? May I come in?" His expression was grave. Eleanor stepped aside, a knot forming in her stomach. "Of course." In her living room, James declined her offer of tea. "I'll be direct, Eleanor. Maya came to me with concerns about changes in your behavior, laboratory supplies being used for undocumented purposes, unusual gaps in your schedule." Eleanor kept her face composed. "Maya is overreacting. I've been conducting some supplementary research at home, that's all." She also mentioned cognitive lapses during meetings, episodes where you seem to lose track of conversations momentarily. The knot in Eleanor's stomach tightened. "I've been working long hours. Everyone experiences fatigue." James leaned forward. "Eleanor, we've known each other for 20 years. If something's wrong, you can tell me." She considered her options. Denial would only delay the inevitable, and James was too perceptive to be fooled for long. "I've been experiencing some cognitive issues," she admitted. "I'm undergoing tests to determine the cause." It wasn't a complete lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. James's expression softened. "Why didn't you say something? The department would support whatever accommodations you need." "Because I don't need accommodations yet," Eleanor said firmly, "and I don't want my work judged through the lens of a potential health issue." "What are the doctors saying?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "The preliminary indicators suggest early-stage Alzheimer's, but it's not confirmed." The shock on James's face was painful to witness. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" "Yes," she said. "You can keep this between us for now. Let me handle this my way in my own time." He nodded slowly. "Of course, but promise me you'll let me know if you need support, professional or personal." "I promise." After James left, Eleanor returned to her makeshift lab, now more determined than ever. The clock was ticking. Her symptoms were becoming noticeable to colleagues. Soon, maintaining her position would be impossible. She prepared the first injection of the compound, carefully following the protocol she had developed. As she administered the dose, she spoke aloud, recording her actions for future reference. Subject EW1, Day 1 of experimental treatment with compound EW 714/D B291. Initial dose 0.05 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Time of administration 8:47 p.m. Baseline vitals recorded in accompanying documentation. No immediate adverse reactions noted. She set a timer to check her vitals at regular intervals throughout the night and settled in to wait. Whether this was a breakthrough moment in Alzheimer's research or simply the desperate act of a scientist unwilling to accept her fate remained to be seen. Chapter 4. Risking the Boundaries. Abigail returned from a pre-production meeting to find 3 missed calls from her mother. Unusual, given Eleanor's preference for texting. She called back immediately. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Eleanor said, her voice vibrant with an energy Abigail hadn't heard in months. "Better than fine, actually. I need you to come over. Bring your camera." "Now? It's almost 10 p.m. "Yes, now." "This is important, Abigail." 20 minutes later, Abigail arrived at her mother's house to find Eleanor in her study, surrounded by notes and data printouts. "What's going on?" Abigail asked, taking in the scene. "You look different." Eleanor smiled, a bright, almost feverish expression. "I've started treatment with the experimental compound." Abigail set down her camera bag. "You what?" 3 days ago. The results are remarkable, Abigail. My cognitive function has improved significantly. Look at these test scores." She thrust a paper toward her daughter. Abigail glanced at the self-administered cognitive assessment results. They did show improvement over Eleanor's most recent baseline, but the change seemed too dramatic for such a short time. "Mom, are you sure this isn't a placebo effect or just a good day?" "It's not placebo," Eleanor insisted. "I've been tracking multiple objective measures: reaction time, working memory capacity, verbal fluency, all showing statistically significant improvement." "What about side effects?" "Minor. Some insomnia, Slight elevation in liver enzymes, nothing concerning. Abigail studied her mother carefully. Eleanor's color was high, her movements quick and slightly jerky. She spoke rapidly, jumping between topics with an intensity that seemed just a bit too bright. "You seem overstimulated." Eleanor waved this away. "A small price to pay for cognitive clarity. I've had more productive research days this week than in the past month combined." "Does your team know what you're doing?" "Not yet. I'll tell them once I have more data." Abigail set up her camera, concerned but recognizing the importance of documenting this development. "Walk me through exactly what you've done." For the next hour, Eleanor explained the protocol she had developed, the dosage calculations, and the monitoring regime she had implemented. She was thorough and methodical, her scientific training evident in every aspect of the self-experiment. "The key innovation," she explained, "is the combined approach, targeting both the cholinergic pathways with our modified memantine and stabilizing tau proteins using the method David theorized. Neither approach alone would yield these results." "So Dad's research was crucial," Abigail noted. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, which makes the timing of this disease cruelly ironic. If I had engaged with his work years ago—" She trailed off, the implication clear. She might have developed this treatment before she needed it herself. "Are you going to continue increasing the dosage as planned?" Abigail asked. "Yes, the next increase is scheduled for tomorrow." "And you're sure that's safe?" Eleanor hesitated, then answered with honesty that surprised Abigail. "No, I'm not sure. This is uncharted territory, but the alternative is certain decline. I'm choosing uncertainty over certainty." Abigail turned off the camera. "I want to stay tonight, monitor you." "That's not necessary." "It wasn't a request, Mom. If you're determined to do this, you shouldn't be alone." Eleanor seemed about to argue, then relented. "All right. Your old room is still set up." Later, after Eleanor had finally gone to bed, reluctantly, still buzzing with energy, Abigail sat in the kitchen, reviewing the footage she had captured. Her mother's transformation was both promising and troubling. The cognitive improvements were real, but there was something almost manic about Eleanor's behavior, a quality that raised red flags. Abigail's phone chimed with a text message from her producer. "Final prep meeting tomorrow. Need to confirm you're still on for shoot next week?" The documentary project in the Southwest was scheduled to begin in just 10 days. Abigail had been looking forward to it professionally, but now the timing couldn't be worse. Her mother was essentially conducting an unauthorized drug trial on herself with unknown risks and no medical supervision. She typed a response. "Need to discuss possible delay. Family medical situation." Within moments, her phone rang. "Abby, we've got tribal elders who've arranged their schedules, permits that expire, and a crew on contract," her producer said without preamble. "What kind of delay are we talking about?" "I don't know yet," Abigail admitted. "My mother is having health issues. It could be a few weeks, it could be longer." "Is there anyone else who can help with her care?" "It's complicated." Abigail rubbed her temples. "Let me figure things out tomorrow and get back to you." After hanging up, she went to check on Eleanor. Her mother was asleep, but restlessly, her face twitching with dreams, or perhaps the effects of the experimental compound. Abigail stood in the doorway, watching the woman who had always been more scientist than mother, now caught in the ultimate experiment, one where she was both researcher and subject. The irony wasn't lost on her. Eleanor had always prioritized her work over family, and now Abigail was considering doing the same, choosing her mother over her career, at least temporarily. The difference was that Eleanor had made her choices when she had all the time in the world. Abigail was making hers knowing that time was running out. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn, her mind already racing with ideas and observations. She carefully documented her sleep patterns, cognitive state upon waking, and various physiological markers. She was preparing her next dose when Abigail appeared in the doorway of her makeshift lab. "How are you feeling?" Abigail asked. "Excellent. Clear-headed. Focused." "Your hands are shaking." Eleanor glanced down, noticing the slight tremor for the first time. A minor side effect. Probably elevated norepinephrine levels from the compound's effect on neural pathways. Should we be concerned? I'm monitoring it. Eleanor finished preparing the increased dosage. Today, I'm attending a departmental meeting and leading a seminar. It will be a good test of cognitive function in a professional setting. Abigail frowned. "Are you sure that's wise? You're experimenting with an unapproved compound." "Which no one needs to know." Eleanor administered the injection with practiced precision. "I've structured the dosing schedule so that peak effects coincide with my highest demand cognitive tasks." "Mom, I need to talk to you about my documentary project." Eleanor looked up, her attention divided between the conversation and her post-injection monitoring. "The indigenous water rights film? What about it?" "I'm considering postponing my involvement." This captured Eleanor's full attention. "Because of me?" "Absolutely not. You're conducting a risky experiment without medical supervision. Someone should be monitoring you." "I'm monitoring myself, quite effectively." "And if something goes wrong? If you have a severe reaction when you're alone?" Eleanor sighed. "Abigail, I appreciate your concern, but I won't be responsible for derailing your career." "This isn't about responsibility. It's about choice. My choice." "A choice you wouldn't be making if I hadn't told you about the treatment." Eleanor began gathering her materials for the day. "I should have kept it to myself until there were more conclusive results." The comment stung. "So, we're back to secrets? To you shutting me out?" "That's not what I meant." Eleanor paused, seeming to recognize the impact of her words. "I'm grateful for your concern, truly, but this project is important to you. You've been talking about it for months." "You're important too," Abigail said quietly. The simple statement hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of their complicated history. Eleanor's expression softened. "Thank you for that," she said. "But I need to do this my way. I need to know I'm not holding you back the way—" She stopped abruptly. "The way Dad did?" Abigail finished for her. Eleanor looked away. "That's not fair. Your father never held me back." "But you think he felt that he did, that his illness forced you to make choices you wouldn't have made otherwise." "We're not having this conversation now," Eleanor said, her tone closing the subject. "I have a department meeting to prepare for." Abigail recognized the deflection but didn't push. "At least let me drive you to campus. That way I can be nearby if you need anything." To her surprise, Eleanor agreed. "That would be helpful, actually. Thank you." The departmental meeting was a triumph from Eleanor's perspective. Her mind felt sharper than it had in months, making connections between research initiatives that her colleagues had missed, offering insights that moved several stalled projects forward. If anyone noticed her slightly accelerated speech or the occasional tremors in her hands, they didn't mention it. James Chen, however, watched her with unconcealed concern. As the meeting concluded, he approached. "Eleanor, could I speak with you privately?" In her office, James closed the door and faced her directly. "What are you taking?" The question caught her off guard. "Excuse me. Your cognitive function has improved dramatically since our conversation last week. Given what you told me about your diagnosis, that's not natural progression." Eleanor considered denying it, but decided against it. James knew her too well. "I'm exploring an experimental treatment." "Your compound? The one that's still in animal trials?" She met his gaze steadily. "Yes." James ran a hand through his graying hair. "Eleanor, that's reckless, unethical, desperate. Choose your adjective, James. I've already considered them all. I was going to say dangerous. The toxicity issues haven't been resolved. They've been reduced significantly with the targeted delivery method, and I'm monitoring my liver and kidney function daily." James studied her, professional concern warring with personal understanding. "The university would never sanction this." "I'm aware. If this comes to light, your career—" "My career has an expiration date regardless," Eleanor interrupted. "You know that as well as I do. This way, at least I have a chance to finish my research before the disease takes that ability from me." James was silent for a long moment, weighing options and responsibilities. Finally, he asked, "Is it working?" "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "Better than I anticipated." "And the side effects?" "Manageable so far. Some tremor, insomnia, occasional heart palpitations." "Those aren't insignificant, Eleanor." "Neither is losing your mind piece by piece." Her voice was sharp, then softened. "I know the risks, James. This is an informed decision." "What can I do?" The question surprised her. She had expected an ethical lecture, perhaps even a threat to report her to the ethics committee. "You're offering to help." "I'm offering to make sure you don't kill yourself in the process of trying to save yourself," he clarified. "I don't agree with what you're doing, but I understand why you're doing it." Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude. "I could use another set of eyes on my monitoring data, and perhaps access to more advanced testing equipment than what I've been able to assemble at home." "Done," James said, "on one condition." "Which is?" "You agree to discontinue the treatment immediately if certain safety thresholds are crossed. No arguments, no extensions." Eleanor nodded. "That's already built into my protocol, but yes, I agree." "Then send me your data tonight. I'll review it before you take your next dose." As James left, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at having an ally, concern about widening the circle of people who knew about her unauthorized experiment, and a persistent underlying anxiety that the treatment's benefits might be temporary or illusory. She called Abigail to let her know she was ready to be picked up. As she waited in the department lobby, she noticed her reflection in a decorative mirror, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, posture erect. She looked healthy, vibrant, fully present in a way she hadn't been in months. But at what cost? And for how long? 2 weeks into the treatment, Eleanor's cognitive improvements held steady, Her self-administered tests showed function above her pre-diagnosis baseline in several areas, particularly verbal fluency and working memory. The tremor in her hands had stabilized rather than worsened, and she had adjusted to the reduced sleep her body now seemed to require. The compound was working, or at least it appeared to be. James had been meticulously reviewing her data, suggesting adjustments to dosage and timing that minimized side effects while maintaining cognitive benefits. He had also discreetly arranged for more comprehensive tests at the University Medical Center, listing Eleanor as part of a small physician-initiated trial to avoid raising red flags. Abigail had postponed her documentary project by 2 weeks, a compromise that allowed her to monitor the initial phase of Eleanor's treatment, while not completely abandoning her professional commitments. She continued to document Eleanor's journey, the footage growing increasingly compelling as the treatment's effects became evident. "I want to try something different for today's recording," Abigail said as she set up her equipment in Eleanor's living room. "Less formal assessment, more personal reflection." Eleanor nodded. The treatment had not only improved her cognitive function, but also seemed to have lowered some of her emotional barriers. She found herself more willing to engage with difficult topics, less inclined to deflect personal questions. "What would you like to discuss?" "Your relationship with Dad," Abigail said directly. "What it was really like, not the sanitized version you've always given me." Eleanor felt an instinctive resistance, then consciously set it aside. "What do you want to know? Were you happy together before he got sick?" "Not always," Eleanor admitted, the honesty feeling both uncomfortable and liberating. "We met in graduate school, brilliant minds attracted to each other. Our work was complementary but distinct. For the first years, that synergy was exciting, fulfilling. What changed? We changed, or rather, our priorities did." Eleanor paused, organizing thoughts about a period of her life she had rarely examined closely. "Your father was brilliant but gentle. He preferred collaboration, consensus. I was more aggressive in pursuing my research, more willing to step on toes to get resources, recognition." "And that created tension?" "Yes. By the time you were born, we were leading separate research lives. We loved each other, but our work had driven a wedge between us." Eleanor smiled sadly. "The irony is that your birth temporarily brought us closer. David was such a natural father. He loved you immediately, completely." "And you didn't?" Abigail's voice was carefully neutral. "I loved you," Eleanor said firmly, "but I didn't know how to be a mother and a scientist simultaneously, not the way David could balance fatherhood and his career. Because he made sacrifices you weren't willing to make." Eleanor considered objecting to this characterization, but realized it contained truth. "Yes, he scaled back his research ambitions, took fewer speaking engagements, collaborated more so he could maintain regular hours. I didn't." "Why not?" "I told myself it was because my work was more promising, more important, that I was closer to breakthroughs that could help people." Eleanor met her daughter's gaze. "But that was only partly true. The complete truth is that I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing myself, of becoming defined by motherhood rather than by my work." Eleanor's voice grew quieter. "I watched brilliant female colleagues disappear into family life, their research slowing or stopping altogether. I didn't want that to happen to me." "So, You chose work over family. I thought I could have both, just sequentially. I believed I had time to focus on my career first, then repair whatever damage that focus caused to our family later. Eleanor laughed bitterly. Life doesn't work that way, does it? David died before later ever came. Abigail was silent for several moments, absorbing her mother's candor. Do you regret the choices you made? Yes and no, Eleanor said. I regret the pain I caused, the moments I missed. But I don't regret the work itself. My research has helped thousands of patients. It may yet help thousands more, including you, including me, though that was never the goal. Abigail adjusted the camera angle slightly. One more question. If you could go back and do it differently, would you? Eleanor considered this carefully. I would try to find a better balance. I would recognize sooner that later is never guaranteed. But would I become a different person entirely? Number, I am who I am, Abigail, for better or worse. After the recording session, as Abigail packed up her equipment, she said, That was the most honest conversation we've ever had. The treatment seems to have affected more than just my cognitive function, Eleanor acknowledged. There's a certain liberation in facing mortality directly. Pretenses become pointless. Is that the treatment or the diagnosis? Perhaps both? Abigail hesitated, then said, I've made a decision about the documentary project. I'm going to do it. Eleanor nodded. Good, you should. But I'll be flying back every weekend to check on you and continue our recordings. That's not necessary. It's not negotiable, Mom, Abigail interrupted firmly. You've made your choice about the treatment. This is my choice. Later that evening, as Eleanor prepared her next dose, her phone rang. It was Maya. Dr. Whitman, I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all, Maya. What is it? We've encountered an unexpected issue with the long-term mouse trials. Maya's voice was tense. Several subjects in the high-dose group are showing signs of neural inflammation after 4 weeks of treatment. Eleanor felt a chill. She was approaching her own 4th week. What kind of inflammation? Primarily in the cerebellum and brain stem. It wasn't apparent in the initial safety studies because they didn't extend beyond 3 weeks. Symptoms? Ataxia, tremors more severe than previously noted, and in 2 cases, seizure activity. Eleanor glanced at the syringe she had prepared. Have you adjusted the protocol? Yes, we've reduced dosage in the remaining subjects and added an anti-inflammatory component. But I wanted you to know immediately, given the implications for eventual human trials. Thank you, Maya. Send me the complete data, please. After hanging up, Eleanor stared at the prepared dose. She was already experiencing tremors as a side effect. Was that the beginning of the inflammation Maya had observed in the test subjects, or just a benign side effect of the compound's primary mechanism? She should reduce her dosage immediately, perhaps even suspend treatment until the inflammation issue was better understood. That would be the responsible course of action. Eleanor stood in her makeshift lab, the prepared syringe in her hand, facing the most critical decision of her self-experiment. Maya's warning about neural inflammation in the test subjects couldn't be ignored, yet the cognitive clarity she'd regained felt too precious to surrender. She placed the syringe down and opened her journal. Day 28 of treatment. Potential neural inflammation detected in long-term animal studies. Decision point reached. As she contemplated her options, she heard Abigail's car in the driveway. Her daughter, had returned unexpectedly. "Mom?" Abigail called, entering with camera equipment. "I rescheduled some meetings. I thought we could—" She stopped, seeing the prepared syringe. "What did Maya tell you?" Eleanor explained the inflammation findings, watching understanding dawn on her daughter's face. "What will you do?" Abigail asked quietly. Eleanor looked at the syringe, then at her research notes. David's insights integrated with her own work, their intellectual partnership finally realized years after his death. "I'm modifying the protocol," Eleanor said decisively. "Reduced dosage, added anti-inflammatories, and I'm calling James to help monitor for cerebral inflammation." "Not stopping completely?" "Not yet." Eleanor met her daughter's gaze. "This isn't just about extending my time, Abigail. It's about completing what David and I started together. If we can solve this inflammation issue, we might help thousands of patients. And if you can't, then we document that too. Success or failure, this journey becomes part of the archives of memory." Abigail set up her camera. "Then let's make sure we get it right." As Eleanor adjusted her treatment plan, she realized that the greatest discovery wasn't the compound itself, but the bridges being rebuilt. Between her research and David's, between science and humanity, between mother and daughter. Whatever time she had left, those connections would endure beyond the fragility of memory itself.